and that is what we are doing over the last years, and we are working together at 27. But of course, to invest more on defense, we need to strengthen our own economy, because only with a stronger our economy, we can spend more and better on defense. This is essential for our economy, and this is essential for our societies.
Okay, our next question is from Sean Defoe from Bauer Media.
Good afternoon, President. Welcome to Dublin on the first day of the Presidency. A question for each of you, if that's okay. President, there's been a lot of talk about tariffs, reducing barriers to trade, competitiveness, as you've said it yourself. Why then, on the day that Ireland takes over the EU presidency, are new import charges, the so-called TMU tax, coming into effect, and why is the EU effectively putting its own barriers to trade into place, given all the talk about trying to reduce it over the last few years? Taoiseach, I might ask for a brief comment from you on that as well, but also, given Vladimir Zelensky is in town, it's been reported this morning that Ukraine has turned down the offer of armoured combat vehicles from Ireland. One, is it not quite embarrassing that they were in such bad nick that a country of war wouldn't take them? But two, is it not skirting very, very close to our neutrality that you've just talked about to offer vehicles that are mounted primarily with machine guns?
Let me take the first. Okay. Well, the European Union is a trade powerhouse. We don't like tariffs. We like trade agreements. And today is a great day because entering in force our trade agreement with the United States. Last year, we invested a lot of our effort to develop a very strong network of trade agreements. Recently, with India, with Mexico, with Indonesia, we are concluding more or less, we have already 84 trade agreements, and we are concluding more 27. This is our priority. We don't like tariffs. We'd like fair trade, and this is our main priority. And today is a good example how we manage by trade agreements to ensure a fair and predictable trade relationship with our partners, namely with the United States.
Could I say, in the first instance on trade, the relationship between the United States and the European Union is an extraordinarily strong and important one from an economy or trading perspective. And we have to mind that, notwithstanding challenges that have arisen in the trade environment. And the fact that we've reached an agreement is overall a positive in the sense that we have found a landing zone that has enabled the continuation of the largest trading relationship in the world. And the Irish relationship with US is very strong, but the European Union trading relationship with the US is particularly strong, both on services and on goods. Also, we support the strategic direction of the Commission, the European Commission, in terms of developing a whole new series of trade agreements, Australia being the latest trade agreement. We have seen from the CETA agreement, the Canada-EU agreement, how much that has benefited Ireland. Our exports have increased fourfold since the CETA, the Canadian-European Union trade agreement, came into force provisionally. So that's illustrative of the potential for European member states to gain from these trade agreements. We'll be supporting the Australian and India. India would be a very significant trade agreement, Indonesia, and so forth. In relation to our support for Ukraine, it has been a multifaceted level of support. First of all, in terms of funding, in terms of hundreds and hundreds of millions, both on humanitarian basis, bilaterally, and also in terms of demining equipment and a range of other equipment that we have provided to Ukrainians that they've taken on board and have utilised. But also in terms of the huge support, 120,000 Ukrainians came to Ireland since the war began. 80,000 are still resident in Ireland, and that has been a very strong financial support over the last number of years since the war began. And also then Ireland from the very beginning, most importantly at the outset, when there wasn't the same level of enthusiasm, we were very supportive of Ukrainian accession to the European Union. And we will continue in our agreement with Ukraine. We'll continue to support Ukraine on a number of fronts, and particularly in response to the requests that Ukraine have made of us, both on the humanitarian, civil society, and indeed non-lethal military side.
Okay, the next question is from Marco Breslin from La Stampa.
Yeah, thank you very much. You both stressed the importance of the trade deal with the US. The EU is implementing from today. But only a few days ago, President Trump threatened again some EU member states, ones who have digital services taxes. President Costa, do you think that it is acceptable, this kind of continued blackmail to the EU member states, and how the EU should respond? And for you, Mr. Taoiseach, President Costa said that you have the task to present a compromise proposal for the next MFF that will include also own resources. The European Parliament suggested to introduce a European digital services tax. Do you think it's a good idea? Thank
you. First of all, we are fully engaged to have good relations with the United States, to stabilize our trade and political relations with the United States, to provide to our companies and the American companies predictability on our trade relations, and that's the main reason because we negotiate, we sign this trade agreement that enter in force precisely today. And this is a good news. We have a stable frame to develop our economic relations. On the other side, of course, Europe, as the United States, are sovereign. The United States will celebrate, and we celebrate with our American friends, the 250th anniversary of their independence, the 4th of July, but also the 27 member states are independent. And we decided to work together as a union, and we will continue to work together on the union, as a union. And regarding new own resources, of course, it's a key element of the next MFF. We increase our ambitions, and then we need to funding our ambitions. We need to have a budget at the same level of our ambition on security, on defense, on competitiveness, on cohesion, on supporting our farmers. We need to have this budget. And of course, if we don't want, and you don't want, to ask more effort from the national budgets, we need to create new own resources to the European Union. The Commission presented a proposal of 5 new own resources. The Parliament came with 3 different proposals of new own resources. One of them, only one of these 8, are regarding the digital services, and we will debate and discuss what is the best solution to have a budget fit for our purpose, to provide to European citizens safe security, defense, competitiveness, quality jobs, and a more cohesive union.
Could I say at the outset, there's 2 dimensions to this. One is the European Union-United States relationship. We observed the G7 statement, by the way, which I think showed a closer alignment on many issues, very welcome, both economically and on Ukraine and so forth. And in terms of the modus operandi, I think it's very important that it's the substance of dialogue with the US that really matters in the end of the day, the actual trade negotiations between representatives from both sides. It was that process that gave way, or that enabled the agreement between the US and the EU on trade. So we need to be careful about placing all of the emphasis on statements that get articulated from time to time. People take positions, people articulate positions, but actually it's in the substance of negotiations that results emerge. In terms of reconciling the irreconcilables at the moment in terms of the European budgetary perspectives of 27 member states, part of that is own resources, and I've been at the last 2 meetings where we had substantive discussions on this, and Ireland will act as an honest broker in terms of trying to reconcile the irreconcilable. And that means some countries think the budget's too high, some countries think the budget is too low, some member states want to protect the core traditional pillars of cap and cohesion, others want to move on the competitiveness front in terms of making sure that we're competitive with the US and China and others in the decades ahead, and that means more research spending and more spending in terms of that which will enable European industry to become more competitive. And so there are a whole range of arguments, including issues, including own resources, that we have to deal with. There's quite a number of own resources issues that we have to discuss, including the one put forward by the Parliament, and they've also put forward cryptocurrency, they've put forward gambling online, and the Commission also has own resources. We look at ETS, we look at CBAM, and see what we can realistically garner from that. But it will be important to get clarity on all of those fairly soon, because then we will know the net position in terms of what we have available to spend, and how do we match that then with the ambition of the Union for the next 7 years.
Okay, our final question from Micheál Carroll from the Irish Daily Mail.
Taoiseach, your Chief Whip Mary Butler has said on WLR FM that there was a cover-up by Fianna Fáil officials in Waterford regarding Bill Keneally's, or the abuse by Bill Keneally. You have said there wasn't. Who's right in this instance?
Okay, the Commission of Investigation itself is the correct position, and Mary Butler didn't quite say what you've articulated. No, sorry, in terms of individuals who were not officials, they were public representatives, and I will be dealing that in the Dáil in terms of a comprehensive state apology in respect of the terrible abuse brought about by Bill Keneally on so many young people in schools. I've met with the victims and the survivors. Extraordinary, violent, horrific crimes committed against them. And the Commission is very clear that the state, and in particular An Garda Síochána, failed in their investigation of those crimes and in holding that person to account far earlier, back in 1987, which would have prevented a lot of abuse that took place in the state. Will be comprehensively addressing that question, and we will in the Dáil as well. And also we'll deal with the role of public representatives, some in our party at the time back in the 1980s and later in relation to that issue.
Was Minister Butler wrong to agree to that? Is she wrong?
No, I think there's a context to Minister Butler's comments. That I've made my comments on that, we'll deal with that in the Dáil.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With the participation of foreign and Russian journalists online. We'll be starting with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov's schedule. On the 3rd of July, head of the Foreign Ministry of Russian Federation will meet the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Guyana, permanent representative of Guyana with the UN in New York, Caroline Rodriguez-Burkett, in the context of her candidacy to take the post of the head of the UN. You know that this is not the first candidate to be arriving to Moscow, who is one of the candidates to this position to hold the meetings with the Russian side, to make us familiar with her electoral program and agenda, In the aftermath of this meeting, we will share our estimations and we will publish a corresponding statement for the media at our website. This is not everything. From the minister's schedules, we will be informing you on the go. Now on the relevant international agenda, situation around Ukraine. Yesterday, the 30th of June, it's been 40 days since the monstrous attacks the armed forces of Ukraine committed against the Pedagogical College in Starobelsk. Children and young people died, 21 people in total. You remember at one of our briefings, namely during our briefing in St. Petersburg, we show you photos, and our embassies, our foreign missions around the world shared the photos. They are forced to do that because the media of the collective West seemingly ignored this tragedy. It was deliberate in character. We're not talking about just photos, we're talking about faces, about voices that we will not get to see or hear anymore. Boys and girls who waited for tomorrow, they studied, they prepared for taking their path in life, they believed in love, they made plans, they wanted to become teachers, to promote everything that they valued, that everything that resonated with their soul, transmitted upon further generations. This is the future that was taken away from them. It was taken away from them by the Kiev regime, those terrorists. They were all too young. They had all their lives still ahead of them. And there is an expression that I just mentioned. They had incomplete lectures in the notebooks. They had dreams that they whispered into each other's ears during recesses, and the entire life that was cowardly, in a cowardly manner, stolen from them. And this life was taken away from babies, from young people, without any option. The Kiev regime took away their lives. They don't see any difference between a child or a soldier. They don't understand what the civilian population is, or on the contrary, understanding what the civilian population is, choosing it deliberately as the target of their strikes. This is not just a strike against a town. This is a strike against the whole essence of humanity, everything that we call conscience. And today, when we bow our heads, we understand that this pain cannot be healed. This injustice cannot be justified. Their short lives were similar to bright flashes that were extinguished all too soon, but we'll do everything in our power not to let this light fade away. And the memory about each of the 21 students of the Pedagogical College in Starobelsk will remain with us forever. Now just look at what the Kiev regime has done in other regions of our country in the recent weeks. With the support of the Western sponsors, they continue their terror campaign against the peaceful population and civilian infrastructure of Russia. They are deliberately choosing their targets. In recent weeks, a few militants' attacks resulted in 327 people injured and 42 people were killed, including 2 children. In the Belgorod region, from June 25th to June 30th, a few strikes resulted in 4 people being killed and no less than 25 injured, including a 15-year-old minor. In the Bryansk region, in the same period, the enemy drone strike resulted in the death of 2 people, including a 15-year-old girl, and 7 people were injured. In the DPR, from June 25th to June 30th, around 10 people were killed in strikes. Around 35 people were injured, including 2 minors born in 2009 and 2011, respectively. In the Zaporozhye region, there are a few strikes resulted in the 2 people being killed and 13 people injured. In the Krasnodar Krai, on the night of 28th of June, while defending from an attack of Ukrainian UAVs against the territory, the explosive remains resulted in the death of 1 person and 1 person injured. In the Kursk region, in the same period, the Benderite attacks resulted in 4 people being injured. In the LPR, 4 people were killed in the same period, another 12 were injured. In the Moscow region, on the 13th of June, the mass air attack resulted in fire in the private domicile in the town of Igorevsk, and the 6-month-old baby was killed. In the Republic of Crimea, 3 people were killed, including a child, and 2 were injured. In the Rostov region, on 27th of June, Ukrainian UAVs attacked National Military Historical Museum of the Great Patriotic War, called the Sambek Heights. 12 people were injured, including a 7-year-old girl, and the Information Exhibition Center building was damaged. I would like to point out that the Sambek Heights is the largest regional memorial complex with a whole surface area of around 14.5 hectares. In the Tula region, on 26th of June, a woman was injured due to a drone strike. In the Kherson region, from June 25th to 30th, a few strikes resulted in the death of 2 people and 5 people injured. Russian law enforcement agencies continue gathering evidence to bring the Kiev regime functionaries, militants, and commanders to justice. This also includes foreign mercenaries that will be brought to accountability for their war crimes. A few militants, Roman Rashchupkin, was sentenced to 14 years in prison in absentia for a terrorist attack committed on the 27th of March 2025. International search was declared for him. The Colombian mercenaries Jorge Leonardo Galvez and Mendoza Camilo Montero and the Norwegian legionary Tor Ivar Brenes Verdal were sentenced to 13.5 and 6 years of prison, respectively. And the same goes for the American mercenaries Jonan Miller and Daniel Eric Lorente. And why I'm remembering about the whole situation, because on the 28th of June marked the 30th anniversary since the adoption of the Ukrainian constitution, and on this occasion, the Kievan usurper Vladimir Zelensky has made a show of hypocrisy in the Kiev Pechorsk Lavra, where he passionately rambled about the value of this principle, piece of legislation, the unity of the people, sovereignty, and independence of the state. And this, we're talking about the locality of this speech, is the Kiev Pechorsk Lavra, is the place where they're still mocking the memory of those who have perished and mocking those still living. So he was talking about the values and the sovereignty and the rights of the citizens, everything that has been infringed upon and continues to be infringed upon by the Kiev regime. Zelensky has inaugurated a memorial plaque dedicated to whom, do you guess? To a traitor hetman, Ivan Mazepa, who was a traitor, and that was his memory in the history, and this was his role in Ukrainian literature and art. And of course, this is the same way that he was remembered in the history of the Orthodoxy, and we spoke about this in more detail during our briefing on the 18th of June. Zelensky also declared about the upcoming legislative enforcement of the status of Ukrainian pantheon, where the Bankovai Street is planning to rebury around 100, as they say, prominent, so to speak, representatives of Ukrainian nation from among the fascist collaborators, nationalists, etc. All those wretches that they are trying to find all around the world to be included in the pantheon. The names of all heroes that throughout history fought for Ukraine, inspired Ukraine, will be reunited and enshrined in our history with a capital letter, with a large attention on the part of the state. That's the direct quote from Zelensky. Well, that's what he said while describing the essence of Ukrainian pantheon. Were those people as prominent, those propagandists, and who is to decide who was a prominent son of Ukraine, a collaborator? All those Melniks and other wretches, are they really prominent sons of Ukraine, children of Ukraine? Perhaps a detailed explanation is in order to explain Zelensky's point of view in regards to the history of Ukraine, if those are the heroes that they are honoring, namely the collaborators who partnered with the Third Reich. He also said that no one will point and order them how to live and which heroes to honor. Excuse me. Every day the Western sponsors and curators are engaged in that. They are providing them with materials, who they should honor and who they should not honor, what they should love, who they should honor and they cherish the memory of or not. And Zelensky, while calling the Kiev-Pecharsk Lavra as the holy site of the entirety of the Christian world, we cannot really call his hypocritical statement as anything but blasphemy. And just let's remember what they did in Gdansk on June 25th, 26th, when they held a conference on the so-called rebuilding and restoration of Ukraine. It's an interesting kind of game to first provide money and weapons without any filter to keep the flame going in the brotherly war, and then ponder how they could rebuild it. This event didn't differ much from the similar events that were held in Switzerland, UK, Germany, Italy, and from the period of 2022-2025. Of course, there was no peaceful agenda discussed at the conference. Its participants discussed the further development of the military-industrial complex and the further integration of Kiev into the defense project of Europe. And no one even hid their intent that they viewed Ukraine as a laboratory and a polygon to test new types of weapons and armaments, and the way to use the existing types of armaments. And due to degradation of relations with Warsaw, due to the recent idea that Kiev had to glorify the fascist collaborators, Zelensky was forced to miss this event, but the delegation of Ukraine was represented by Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko. She tried her best. She thanked Poland without end. She thanked Europe, she thanked the collective West, and she solemnly reported that 160 agreements was signed for a total number of 10 billion euros. And this sum will not be sent to restore Ukraine. On the contrary, it will be used to further destroy it. The organizers themselves, for some reason, are naming much more modest numbers. Why is that? Perhaps Ukrainian officials mentioned those billions as part of the already approved loans from Europe. This is not a sponsorship type of aid. This is just those are just loans, and the money that they received will have to be returned with interest. And Bankove, besides that, will have to take a lot of measures that will completely demolish the remains of its law and its social sphere, to broaden the list of state assets to be privatized, so they are just they would be just selling everything that they still have. The first tranche of 3.5 billion euros was also inaugurated at the conference from the civilian component of the loan, numbering in 19 billion euros, and the funds to finance the military expenses amounting to 6 billion euros from the 28 billion euros already approved will be transferred to them on the eve of the upcoming NATO summit in Ankara. Perhaps there should be some substance given to that event. Those agreements signed in Gdansk will increase the national debt of Kiev by 2.5% of the overall GDP, and no one talks about that. The European Commission also announced that they have launched the flagship foundation of restoration of Ukraine, together with the European Investment Bank, Germany, Italy, Poland, and France. And the initial capital amounts to 220 million euros. The EU officials expect that this mechanism will allow to mobilize in the future, without any time frames, mobilize investments for an overall amount of up to 7 billion euros to restore infrastructure and to further develop the manufacturing industry. The First, Vice Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal also called for donations because he also participated in the so-called Energy Rammstein on the sidelines of the Gdansk meeting. He also reported about the agreements made for the provision of 371 million euros to ensure the energy resilience of the country. But he was forced, nevertheless, to admit that there's still an outstanding deficit of around 650 million euros still existing. In the conditions of the extreme corruption of the Zelensky regime and the growing competition in the EU in regards to the managing of the funds sent to Ukraine, there is no doubt that this money will not be able to be used to restore the country, as happened before. The majority of those funds will remain in Europe, and the money that will be provided to Kiev, as we already saw, will end up in the pockets of government officials, as we saw on numerous occasions, and as was reported in the media. The event has also demonstrated that Ukraine is more and more perceived by its allies as a colony, where each of those participants is trying to, each of those willing, from the coalition of the willing, is trying to promote their own national and economic interest. However, it's difficult to call them national interest, more like interest of the elites. So those interests will be promoted at the expense of the exploitation of the remaining Ukrainian resources. Now on the statement of Sybiga, the Foreign Minister of Ukraine. About the tonality, the lack of logic, we will not even be mentioning that because this is a hallmark and a calling card of Mr. Sybiga. But this time he has outdone himself, because on the 27th of June, he claimed in his social media account, among his emotional speech, he claimed that the Alaska understandings between Russia and the United States have ended, and in a certain type of way he demanded of our country to start negotiations with Ukraine. But the reality shows one thing clearly: if the spirit of anchorage even existed at one point, it is dead right now. And for Russia, the lesson of anchorage is that any peace plan developed without Ukraine, it's important to note that it is doomed to become a spirit and dissipate. Moscow should stop believing in ghosts and instead should respond to Ukraine's serious proposals and get to the table of negotiations to end the war. And Zelensky perhaps started to share some of the products with Sybiga. I would like to remind everyone that Sybiga in November 2025 claimed that Kiev unilaterally suspended their participation in direct negotiations with Moscow, allegedly to the perceived lack of tangible progress.
And today, he, well, I would say completely unfazed, but rather phased in a different manner, calls us to sit down at the negotiation table. But I beg your pardon, that's where Sybiga left from. I would like to ask a question to everyone who's talking on behalf of Ukraine. Maybe you should keep some kind of register for all of your quotes. Hire some people with all those billions that you receive, and they will tell you what you're saying and how it contradicts your own quotes from a week ago or a year ago. I'd like to repeat myself. Those negotiations that were held, I mean direct negotiations that were held in 2025, a year ago, were discontinued by the Ukrainian side, by Ukraine. It's a different matter that this was also done upon the advice from abroad by the sponsors, the coalition of the willing, that constantly tell the Kiev regime whom to talk to, how to talk to them, whom to love, whom to hate. And Zelensky said that no one tells them what to do. No, they're being told to do all the time because they're very much afraid. I mean, Sybiga and his henchmen, that Ukraine has lost irreversibly. Its sovereignty and independence is completely capped by its Western masters who define their domestic and foreign policy. Specific examples. Negotiations since 2022 shows us that Kiev is incapable of making an independent decision about the end of conflict. At the first signal, let alone signal some whisper coming from abroad, it cowardly paddles back, destroying what was agreed upon and, very importantly, even initialed. That was precisely the situation in April 2022, when the negotiation process was rudely violated by the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Boris Johnson, who banned the Kievan government to continue dialogue with Russia and demanded to continue hostilities. The question is what he promised and what kind of assurances he gave. But that's a different matter. But the fact that the order to stop the negotiations in 2022 is a well-established fact. It was confirmed by London as well. Besides, Ukraine has showed multiple times its total incapacity to negotiate, as they abandoned the obligations they've taken upon themselves without hesitation, be that the Minsk agreements or the proposals supported by President Trump about the energy truce in March and April 2025 and cessation of hostilities due to the Victory Day in the Great Patriotic War in May 2026. Examples abound. Sybiga thinks in the paradigm of the Kiev regime illusions and European sponsors inspired narratives about the inevitability of a swift defeat of Russia and the need to force it to peace and negotiate on the Ukrainian conditions from the position of strength. At the EU's behest, the Ukraine are trying to use some kind of window of opportunity, as they say, to implement such plans. But I would like to have a short clarification, a small question here. Where have you seen the word peace in all of that words and gibberish? Where did you see the word peace initiative that are so often mentioned in Brussels?
Вроде бы говорит периодически киевский режим, выезжая знаете, с такими экспортными выступлениями на различных
with the AFU, and they should withdraw AFU from Donbass and will speed up the end of hostilities. That's for some realistic scenarios. One more important topic about prisoner exchanges and attitudes to POWs. On the 5th and 26th of June, there were 2 exchanges of prisoner of war. 345 people and 7 civilians returned home on both sides. 8 families were reunified. It was possible due to intense and coordinated work, primarily by Ministry of Defense of Russia, Human Rights Ombudsman Yana Lantratova, and other stakeholder federal agencies, as well as facilitation by Belarus. However, Kievan regime typically tries to turn into PR actions, such typically humanitarian actions. As Ukrainian media are saying, the head of Secretariat of Coordination Staff of Ukraine on Treatment of Prisoners of War, Bogdan Akhrimenko, as well as Ukrainian Ombudsman Dmitry Lubinets, said some false statements about the alleged torture by Russia against prisoners of war of AFU. The goal of such insinuations is clear: to denigrate our country and to form, as they say, proof to be used by quasi-legal mechanisms, International Criminal Court, which have long become a puppet of a repressive body of the Western countries, and other special tribunal by the Council of Europe and other illegitimate structure. We're seeing this favorite tactic by the Kiev regime. If they need to hide their own crimes, they need to place the blame about atrocities, and accompanied by a flow of lies. We can remember such myths as the Heavenly Hundred, the massacre in Bucha, and the record number of lies belongs to the myth about the topic about the allegedly kidnapped children. We're still trying to make sense about the number, about the figures, the official figures by the Kiev regime. Which specific figure they have the claim about? Sometimes they talk about hundreds of thousands, or sometimes 339 people, not millions, not thousands. Later it skyrockets again to millions of children. At the same time, the modern Banderovites have long bypassed their idols from the Third Reich in terms of cruelty and inhumanity. People who are following the situation are truly aghast at their actions. Since the beginning of the special military operation, we have detected multiple violations of international humanitarian law by the Kiev regime. We have published many videos about the torture, real torture, that led to deaths by torture. Torture that was done by the AFU military and National Battalion members. The text version of today's briefing will have the references to video materials. We've shared them throughout the years. Contrary to international obligations and common norms and customs of war, Ukrainian henchmen are holding hostage Russian military in horrible conditions, mistreat them, and torture them. That is confirmed by international monitoring mechanisms, including the UN Monitoring Mission on Human Rights in Ukraine and HRC office. On the internet, there are multiple videos with mistreatment of Russian military and civilians. The neo-Nazis film all of that, and they believe that to be their feats of valor. They publish it online, and they think that's reason to be proud. Kiev henchmen terrorize the loved ones of prisoners of war. I've read about it in some kind of novels and fiction about middle-age kind of cruelty in Western Europe. But something like that happening in modern times, especially in the countries who are talking about their commitment to human rights and so on. I've never heard about that. But the Kiev regime is yet again setting the worst example.
Обзванивают родственников, показывают им тех, над кем глумятся, показывают, как глумятся.
as a direct turn of Kiev towards terrorism. We see an uptake in the number of victims among children and teenagers as a result of deliberate attacks of AFU against educational facilities and crowded places. One of the most horrible cases was targeted strike against college in Starobelsk on the 22nd of May that we've just mentioned and will continue to mention it. We see systematic attempts by the militants of the Kiev regime to create unbearable conditions for civilians, in particular in Kherson and Zaporozhye region and Republic of Crimea. This report with figures and facts proves that the Kiev regime deliberately uses policy of terror against civilians, disregarding any ideas about legality or morality, and bears direct responsibility for mass war crimes conducted on the Russian territory at a connivance and blessing from their Western sponsors. This briefing, as usual, will be broadcast on the MFA website in the Russian language, simultaneously interpreted into English, Spanish, and French, as well as broadcast online on other accounts of the Foreign Ministry in social media. The work on the collection and documentation of real proof of this kind of other war crimes of Kiev is being done systemically by Russian law enforcement. According to their data, 4,762 of our military servicemen reported torture by AFU. Investigative Committee of Russia initiated 172 criminal cases on use of torture and violence against prisoners of war. Everyone responsible for these inhumane actions will be brought to justice. Incidentally, Ukrainian Nazis subject to torture their own draftees. There was an outcry due to journalist investigation by Babel Publishing about cruelty used in the elite 425th Assault Regiment Skala Rock, directly reporting to the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. According to the testimony received, the draftees of that unit were regularly beaten up as punishment, for example, for trying to run away. They were covered in water and urine. They were tied to ATVs and dragged on the ground. If you don't believe me, you can find this investigation independently. I'd like to repeat myself. This is data by the news outlet called Babel. This is not the only outlet, not the only investigation in this regard, but this is just very recent. As part of punishment, as I have already said, they use terrible torture. This is not instruction, this is nothing legal that is to be applied as punishment. This is pure torture. We know about 26 non-battle deaths in that regiment in 6 months, and something tells me that these and other cruel torture is flourishing in other units of the AFU. Why do I think that? Testimony of witnesses or their relatives. That all proves how relevant are the tasks to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine, eliminate threats coming from its territory, and these goals will be achieved, as was said multiple times by the Russian leadership. Moving on to another topic, but is directly connected to the situation in Ukraine, and their Western handlers of the Kiev regime. Today, in Moscow, on Gogolovsky Boulevard, there'll be an opening of the exhibition by the Russian Military and Historical Society called Crimean Gold, air quotes, civilized Europe pillaging Russian treasure. It tells us about unprecedented decision of foreign biased courts, about non-return of unique museum collection of Tauric, Khersonis, and other museums of Crimean Peninsula to the territory of its origin. That will give you a reference to these materials. In 2013, Kerch Historical and Cultural Museum and National Preserve Tauric Khersonis Bakhchisarai Historical, Cultural and Archaeological Museum and Preserve and the Central Museum of Tours signed contracts with Bonn University and Dutch Museum by Allard Pearson to hold an exhibition, Crimea, Gold and Secrets of the Black Sea. About 508 artifacts, about 2,000 different items brought from Crimean museums were exhibited in the Netherlands Museum. A month before the end of the exhibition, Crimea returned to Russia, and the neo-Nazi Kiev regime tried to pocket the Russian treasure. Museum of Allard Pearson earned tremendous money on the hype around the Crimean gold. However, the Dutch never have enough. These are the traditions of colonizers. Disregarding all international laws, they refused to return the exhibits to Crimea. In 2016, the judges of Amsterdam, direct descendants of the bankers who started to get rich on pillaging the colonies, denied the Crimea their right to property on their artifacts. Essentially, the Netherlands put themselves alongside the Hitler Nazis who pillaged Russian museums in 1941-44. The heads of foreign museums blatantly violated contract obligations at the connivance of political interests of non-friendly states. Why did they do that? That's a question. It still remains a fact.
Any attempts to reach justice through international courts were in vain due to the complete bias existing within the foreign courts. And the Supreme Court of Netherlands in 2023 has decreed that the collection should be transferred to Ukraine. And the corrupt Kiev regime is planning to use the gold for their own financial economic gain. Clearly, the gold can reappear in the collection of any Ukrainian collector or Ukrainian official or member of parliament, perhaps from among so-called Ukrainian refugees in Monaco. Unfortunately, in our country we saw numerous examples where foreign invaders ransacked our cultural heritage without second thought, and especially in that regard we saw the Nazis of the Third Reich distinguishing themselves, who are of course a role model for the officials of the Kiev regime. The consolidated catalogue of the cultural values of the Russian Federation that have been stolen or lost during the Second World War, listing the lost art pieces, includes more than 1 million items, and the full text of those. The link for this catalog will be presented in the text version of the briefing, and the work to rediscover those items to return them to our midst didn't stop for a second, and the same will go for the stolen masterpieces from among the collection of the Crimean Peninsula museums. And the smaller version of the exhibition will be opened near the Embassy of the Netherlands, and the exhibition on the Gogolevsky Boulevard will last until the end of July this year. This exhibition, the opening exhibition, will be attended by representatives of the Russian Military Historical Society, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, National Center of Historical Memory, and the museum community. We talked about Netherlands in one key. Where does this Russophobia come from? From humanitarian affairs to other scopes, to the political domain, and in the cyberspace too. We note another attack, a manifestation of outright Russophobia from among the authorities of the Netherlands. Now we see some accusations leveled against us due to our so-called capability in the activity of some hacker groups in territory of the kingdom. And who is currently monitoring those news? Those people will not have any questions about it, because of course there has been no proof about our capability. According to the UN General Assembly Resolution 73/27 of 11 December 2018 pertaining to the cyberspace, and I mentioned the fact that this Russophobia is manifesting where cooperation should exist. According to this resolution, attribution of blame to states for their capability in computer attacks should be justified. And the mechanisms that have been already created, they exist for the express purpose of having all, as diplomats say, concerns, all issues, all challenges, all risks, any facts or even suspicions could be worked on in a constructive order with some result visible at the end, namely prevention of crime, exchange of data on criminals, joint investigations, of course. Netherlands is not interested in any of that. I would like to point everyone's attention to the fact that the so-called victim country didn't send any requests to us. Same goes about the global intergovernmental registry of contact points. The very mechanism that has been elaborated and devised a long time ago exactly for that purpose, to be used in that domain. Once again, if there are any justified claims against this or that country. It's obvious that The Hague has a task to fabricate another clumsy pretext to frighten Europe with the ghost of the Russian threat. And as they say, they use these narratives for that purpose. And it's not surprising that Netherlands have once again distinguished itself with some falsehood leveled against us. And the authorities of this country are trying their best to justify the doctrine according to which Russia is, as they formulate, the principal threat in the world information space. Another affair concerning international law and how one's trying to twist it and some are trying to uphold it. On the 29th of June 2026, Russian Federation has submitted a memorandum to the International Court of Justice. And I'm talking about the ICJ, not the International Criminal Court. The Russian Federation has submitted a memorandum to the International Court of Justice containing irrefutable proof that the decision of the ICAO Council of June 30th, 2025, that is according to which accusations have been basically leveled against our country for our role in the crash of the Malaysian MH17 Boeing 777. And the decision of the ICAO Council was appealed by Russian International Court of Justice on the 18th September 2025 and has been frozen since then. The defendants in this case are essentially Australia and Netherlands that have previously initiated the case against Russia in the ICAO Council. Essentially, we see that the ICAO Council is itself finding itself on the defendants' bench because it, while being a political body, didn't manage to uphold its function to settle disputes coming from the 1944 ICAO Convention on International Civil Aviation. The decision of the ICAO Council has been appealed on 9 principal grounds of legal, procedural, and factological character. Each of these has been supplemented by exhaustive evidence. The total volume of the memorandum is 570 pages and another 1,500 pages of appendices. In the memorandum, we deliberate that the Council has gone outside its own competence and has committed significant errors in establishing and the evaluation of factological circumstances of the case and erroneously interpreted the key legal norms and violated its own rules of procedure and unjustifiably ignored all the evidence provided by the Russian side. From the factological standpoint, the Council has ignored multiple cases of tampering and inconsistencies of the Dutch technical investigation and the corresponding work of the joint investigation team involving the defendants themselves, namely Australia and Netherlands, as well as Belgium, Malaysia, and Ukraine, but not Russian Federation. The Council didn't take into account that all conclusions of the investigation organized by the Dutch have been built on controversial testimonies of anonymous witnesses and information that was provided by an initially unreliable source, the Security Service of Ukraine. The same goes for the satellite images that have not been presented. And those satellite images, the United States claimed that they confirmed the version of Australia and the Netherlands. How many times did the Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, or many of our representative in the corresponding permanent missions noted that and called on those satellite images to be released and shared with us, at least in the framework of relevant agencies. And why not share them with the broader public? Every day they are publicizing so-called UEP data, and when it comes to satellite images of Earth about what's happening on our planet, something prevents them from sharing them. The Council ignored Ukraine's culpability in the crash, starting from Kiev's refusal to fully close the airspace over the armed conflict zone, and ending with the testimonies about the fact that the plane was shot down by the AFU, including evidence that the Ukrainian anti-air forces were present in the region, and that the debris of the missile pointed to its Ukrainian origin. However, it is of direct importance in regards to the question whether Russia is responsible for the crash or not. From the legal standpoint, the ICAO Council erroneously interpreted the most important norms of the Chicago Convention, namely Article 89, on the non-use of convention in regards to the actions of states involved in the armed conflict, both engaged and neutral, and Article 3 bis in regards to the non-use of force towards civilian aircraft. The Council also used a wrong standard of evidence and violated norms of national law in regards to the responsible states. From the procedural standpoint, the ICAO Council, being a political structure, manifested extreme bias. The members of the Council, not being independent judges or arbiters, and only being representative of the ICAO member states, made a decision without studying the case and making a careful, meticulous study of evidence. And the Council exceeded its authority, in particular through demanding the Russian Federation to hold negotiations with Australia and Netherlands in regards to the reparation for the crash. Instead of conducting a comprehensive, meticulous, independent incident as demanded by the UNSC Resolution 2166, the ICAO Council limited itself to a biased and politicized stamping of the results of the initially biased investigation that was conducted by unfriendly states. The Russian side is sure that the evidence that we provided is more than enough for this decision of the ICAO Council to be cancelled. Now I want to write a topic, a very relevant event with the Russian participation that took part in Mongolia this month under the auspices and with the support and with the direct participation of the Russian railways in the framework of international volunteer program Mission for Good, with the assistance of the Russian-Mongolian joint enterprise, the Ulaanbaatar Railways, the Embassy of the Russian Federation in Mongolia, and the local Ministry of Healthcare. In Ulaanbaatar, in the far other regions of Mongolia, we saw the humanitarian mission conducted by a mobile consultative and diagnostical center, namely the St. Panteleimon train. This is a unique type of train. It's called a mobile hospital. It comprises 14 carriages. 8 of them includes diagnostic wards with the most modern equipment. For the residents of the remote regions of Mongolia where there are no doctor's offices, such a mobile complex has become a unique opportunity to receive qualified medical aid without going to local urban centers. Russian and Mongolian doctors had to work extra hours, receiving around 200 people per day. 3,000 people received medical attention. It's important that a third of all illnesses were discovered for the first time in the lives of the patients. I would like to point out that this joint social humanitarian project has received huge positive attention from among the local population, and there have been lines towards our specialists, and their actions have deserved highest estimation on behalf of the leadership of Mongolia. And this demonstrated the importance of this initiative. This is an important achievement, and this assistance was provided to the friendly people of Mongolia at the request of our Mongolian friends. I hope that these initiatives, those wonderful projects, will become a good example of our humanitarian cooperation with other states and will help reinforce friendship between our peoples. We have a lot of such projects, and I think that this was an outstanding example in the conditions of the world that has been torn apart by endless divisions and provocations. It is those projects that need to be focused on. An important date, on the 11th of June, we celebrate the 70th anniversary since the establishment of diplomatic relations between the Russian Federation and the Republic of Tunisia. Throughout the decades, our countries have been united by multifaceted and mutually beneficial relations. There is an established constructive political dialogue. There is a solid normative legal framework. There are good prospects for further development in our cooperation when it comes to trade and economy, science and technology and humanitarian area. Our positions in regards to the most important national issues are close or aligned. We have always defended the just multipolar world order based on the strict respect for the basic norms of international law enshrined in the UN Charter, including the principle of sovereign equality and non-interference into internal affairs of other states. Russian-Tunisian connections have always been characterized by bright manifestations of mutual sympathy and respect. Our countries are united by common cultural and historical heritage. For example, talented Russian painter and publicist Alexander Rubtsov, at the beginning of the 20th century, he worked in Tunisia, and his unique art belongs to both our peoples. We will be adding a corresponding link to the text version of our briefing. Also, another story related to Tunisia is this story of the Black Sea Squadron of the Russian fleet, which left Crimea during the civil war in Russia and found its refuge in the port of Bizerta. There are still burials of Russian officers and sailors in that city, cared for by the members of our diaspora and the Tunisian activists. We're convinced that the garnered experience of our cooperation is the solid foundation for the further reinforcement and broadening of a multifaceted interaction for the benefit of both our states and peoples. So one more important humanitarian topic: we're still receiving applications in regards to the main educational award of Russia, Znanie Premia, or Znanie Knowledge Prize. This application process will last until September 2026. This prize was established by the Znanie Society in Russia in 2021 to recognize the achievements of teachers, lectors, authors, bloggers, popularitors of science, and other educational figures. And this year, this is the 6th installment of this prize. There have been a total of 65,000 applications from 89 regions across the 79 foreign states. For example, the nomination of Foreign Educator of the Year was established in 2023. The applicants are actively promoting projects in such areas as falsification of historical facts in our country and the promotion of Russian culture and science. I had the honor to talk with the applicants and nominees in that area. Those are wonderful people with very important projects. And last season, for example, I would like to remind everyone that the Italian war correspondent Andrea Lucidi won in that category for telling the truth about the events in Donbass in spite of the colossal pressure exerted upon him on the part of the Italian authorities. We know about the examples of true heroism in the world. There are a lot of them, and we think that they deserve the recognition on the highest level. Other than that, Russians living abroad can also compete for this award. Thanks to them, thanks to our compatriots abroad, our culture is still living and is developing not only in the territory of our country, but far away from its boundaries. Together with the participants from Russia, they can apply for 15 nominations from history, health, and sports to science and technology. We invite all those willing to participate to take part in this important, modern, and creative initiative, and to submit your application on the official website of the project. The link, of course, we will provide it in the text version of our briefing. And now I am ready to answer your questions. Is International Affairs Journal with us? Yes. Good afternoon. Recently, the leader of the Alternative for Germany party in Germany, Alice Weidel, stated that Germany should lift the ban for purchasing Russian hydrocarbons to support, as she says, the weakening economy of Germany. How would you comment on that statement? You know that back then, the moratorium in regards to the hydrocarbon shipments from a country was leveled by their own authorities. They expected to weaken the economy, however, Russian economy, not their own economy. But all these actions led to the weakening of their own economy, however. And we've just saw that there was a large post, not official information, but some data referencing German monitoring structures that showed this terrible force and influence of German and EU sanctions of the anti-Russian character and the refusal to purchase our resources and hydrocarbons to the economy of their own countries.
I think you can read up on that, and we'll place the link in this section as well. As for the stated goal, when they formulated that as delivering a strategic defeat to Russia, what was it again? Destruction of Russian economy and so on. That goal was not achieved. And they will not achieve it, incidentally. However, rather tremendous detriment was delivered to the energy-intensive economy of Germany. That was terrible damage that they have done to themselves. On the other hand, since we're just started to look at the life the way it happens, we're just looking at people who are doing damage themselves. But there are people like that. Not that they're being extreme or that they're strange, but this is a kind of psychological disturbance, doing damage to yourself, self-harm. I cannot call it anything but mental illness, shooting themselves in the foot, so to speak. An important question that arises from that: are the citizens of Germany fine with that? With the development of industry and economy and the development of the situation on the whole? Are they not fine with that? But they are not given the chance to ask the question. Journalists and political activists and parties, different representatives of social community, businesses representatives, and economic operators simply don't have the right to ask the question. Since they live in conditions of democracy, maybe the nation of Germany should be asked, do they like that or not? Maybe they should have listened to the nation. Were it not banned, well, maybe not banned precisely, but rather prevented. Interestingly, this way or another, directly or indirectly, this question could be placed since next fall in Germany. There are a number of eastern parts of Germany, eastern regions of Germany, that are to hold the elections in their legislative chambers. And I think you've quoted ADF, Alternative for Germany. I think they're bypassing by great margin Christian Democratic Union headed by Chancellor Merkel and Social Democratic Party of Germany. I'm not quite sure of that. I'm always trying to understand what's happening. I'm not a specialist on Germany, but it's just interesting what's happening with the Christian Democratic Union. What's left of Christianity there? It's just interesting. Such obscurantism was never expected by the founding fathers of the party. As you know, we've stated multiple times that there were no hindrances of our discussions to renew supply of hydrocarbons to Germany. Let the official Berlin decide what they want. though I'm not entirely sure that there are people left with the current officials who are capable of making independent decisions. Nevertheless, they should have a mainstream decision, what kind of natural gas they want, at what price, what will arise from that, what kind of consequences will happen, and where they're going to get money to finance all of that. I think it's just a simple calculation. Though you do know that the question asked by the German journalist, compact edition, I think it was, can Russia renew the supply? For that question, the German journalist from that news outlet received a notion by court that their outlet will be closed down and sanctions will be imposed upon them. Here you go. Western democracy served for you. Do we have Russia today? I'm sorry, I have yet another question, sorry. I wanted to listen to your comments on more active efforts by the EU on the development of Trans-Caspian international transport route. Do you think is that an attempt to compete with Russia in terms of building international transportation corridors in the Caspian region as well? You know, we see active efforts by the EU to develop Trans-Caspian international transportation route. A lot is being said about that. There is greater action around it, but the fact is that in order for it to function properly, it would take, and let's speak honestly, maybe the EU is silent on that, but it would take multi-billion investments and many years of coordinated efforts of stakeholder states, international bodies, and businesses to fine-tune infrastructure to ensure complex logistics. It is very complex. I'd like to add something. Today we spoke about multi-billion investment in, let's say, continued conflict in Ukraine, investment done by the European Union. We spoke about militarization, and we talk about that daily in the Western Europe. We constantly note that this high-tech concern, or that used to work for many years in one of the Western countries, is stating their insolvency, or they're moving from the continent to other continents, or that they're switching to the military-industrial base. Hence the question, where does the EU intends to get many billions and the coordinated action between businesses, the state, companies, and so on, if all trends are clearly pointing to a completely different trend, to the opposite, lack of coordination in investments, lack of investment opportunities, and naturally about the plans of militarization of Western Europe and an aggressive actively aggressive lobbying of militarization and unpacking their conflict potential. I think many know the answer to this question. Let's get back to the project you've mentioned. This project requires double reloading from railroad or car transportation to sea transport and back in Caspian and Black Sea crossing, and it heightens the prime costs. Besides, in order to increase the capacity, it would take more than just building new railroads, since China and Turkey on the one hand and the post-Soviet countries on the other hand have a different gauge, so it would take a great increase of stations that would do the bogie exchange of freight cars. This state of affairs makes us think that Western Europe is ignoring the economic feasibility and trying to find a way to redirect freight flow and cargo flow from Asia-Pacific region into Europe bypassing Russia, trying to follow their notorious idea about delivering strategic defeat to our country, or as I would say, defeating themselves. And the EU, according to our information, is prepared to earmark about 10 billion euro through the bonds guaranteed by European Commission. That very European Commission that has already defrauded their citizens with vaccines by billions of euros. No one can take count of how much money was thrown away. And how could Ursula von der Leyen conduct that? Purchases by SMS, doing that with her alleged friends or someone from her inner circle. That very European Commission did nothing in the past years so that the world could unite about any topic. However, time and again, the European Commission adds fuel to the fire, be that conflict on the European continent or in other parts of the world. They're trying to preach to everyone how to live, but they don't see their own issues, starting from human rights and ending with the economy. And so that very European Commission will become the guarantor. And such tremendous figures as Ursula von der Leyen will be the guarantors of bond issues. However, let's talk about us. Russia dedicates great attention to building new continental transportation and logistic architecture, sped up modernization of active and future international transportation corridors, implemented the initiative of the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, about shaping of greater Eurasian partnership. Such strategic priorities for national development prove their relevance against the backdrop of the current geopolitical turbulence, the current crisis in the Middle East, together with the disruption of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, as well as new colonial practices of the Western states that have to do with illegal limitations in air and sea communications, new pillaging and piracy. They're also getting rid of responsibility for guarantees. Russia offers its competence in logistics and functioning infrastructure, including international transportation corridor, north-south, and trans-Arctic transportation corridor on the basis of Northern Sea Route. The international transportation corridor north-south is called to join the north of Eurasia with major logistic hubs on the shores of the Persian Gulf and Indian Ocean, and we are sure that the current exacerbation of the situation in the Middle East will complicate a number of tasks, but will not change the sentiment of our partners for the fully-fledged launch of the corridor. We spoke about that at the previous briefing, and you will see the link in today's briefing. The use of northern and Arctic routes cuts the time of transcontinental transit and gives us potential to build new routes supplying Russian energy from Arctic fields towards South and Southeast Asian countries. And we believe that uninterrupted supply chains, international supply chains, is key to stable and sustained development of global economy. As for us, unlike the Western bodies, we undertake steps to eliminate barriers in wider liberalization of trade relations. We are prepared for constructive work with all interested partners to bring together efforts in the interest of strengthening Eurasian transport connectivity. Thank you very much. Do we have Russia Today with us? Yes, hello. Good afternoon. According to the information that we received from the community, on the 3rd of July, Uzbekistan will hold the first court on proceedings on Aziz Hakimov, Russian blogger, accused of instigating ethnic hatred. What is Russia doing that to protect the rights of the citizen? We're cognizant of the situation, and we keep abreast of the situation with Aziz Hakimov. I'd like to remind you that he does not have the Russian citizenship, and we do not want to interfere in the domestic affairs of the friendly state of Uzbekistan, but we cannot but consider that Azim Hakimov is a representative of social community of Uzbekistan, considering the calls that were heard in his videos towards strengthening the brotherly relations between Russia and Uzbekistan and efforts to promote our common cultural values and moral values, he proved to be a long-time friend of our two countries, an advocate for the development of relations between the countries, and we hope that the court proceedings will end up in a just and humane decision. Thank you. Do we have RIA Novosti with us? Yes. Good afternoon. Christine Laberdine, RIA News. We have one question today. Armenia intends to introduce amendments to the election code, according to which the citizens will be able to take part in referendums and in voting only if they live for 6 months before the day of the vote. How would you like to comment on that? Thank you. You know, naturally, we also saw that legislation initiative that is trying to be pushed through as swiftly as possible before the end of the mandate of the current parliament of Armenia. The fully fledged legal analysis belongs to the experts, though some Armenian specialists already see in these novelties possible contradictions with the constitution, with the Armenian constitution that is in force. Usually, laws are intended to defend the rights of the citizens of the countries, but it seems to be on the contrary. People with Armenian passports are deprived of their basic rights, that is, to vote. It just comes to mind that the election campaign in Moldova in 2025, back then, Sandu regime deliberately did everything not to allow the Russian compatriots not to exercise their right to vote. In Armenia, it would turn out the same. The diaspora will remain segregated from the political and social life of their country and their people. It is interesting the way this draft law is presented to the people, or rather the way it is being used as a hoax. A number of pro-governmental media presented as a tool to fight with the hybrid attacks of Kremlin, alleged hybrid attacks of Kremlin that allegedly tried to play the card of Armenian diaspora in Russia during the parliamentary election. I think this myth is debunked by the figures publicly presented by the National Security Service of Armenia. According to their data, in May and June 2025, more citizens entered the republic than compared to the same period this year. So who's playing it dirty? Thank you so much. Moving on. Do we have the Media Corporation of China with us? Yes, we're here. We have two questions. Last week, China hosted two major events, Summer Davos Forum in Dalian and 4th China International Supply Chain Expo. It shows the preparedness of China to introduce innovative technologies and promote open cooperation in production and logistic chains, as other countries are building new barriers. What's the Foreign Ministry's take on open innovations and joint use of cooperation and Russian-Chinese cooperation, scientific, technical, and other spheres? Russian-Chinese practical cooperation is developing a sustained and stable nature based on the Treaty on Good Neighborliness, Friendship, and Cooperation between our countries. In the upcoming days, where we have recently celebrated 25 years of its signing, that was an official celebration during the context at the highest level. I think it will be a year of celebrations of this outstanding milestone in bilateral relations. Our trade and economic ties are showing adaptability and sustainability in the face of global challenges. I think they've been time-tested and tested by the challenges they have to do with the changes in the world.
С тем, что в том числе, наверное,